I do have a friend uh, who identifies herself, I would say, as a feminist and very socially proactive and everything like this. And I remember being at her birthday party, and everyone there was dressed exactly the same way. But it was like, yeah, all my clothes are dark and brown, and no labels on anything, no logos. Everything's really nondescript. It doesn't show off my figure in any way, shape, or form. But this is how everyone was dressed.
Yeah,
And it's almost like if someone were to come into this environment dressed in what you might consider to be the way we consider what society says, or I don't know, society,
yeah,
um, they would be the transgressive ones. You know what I mean?
sure. Yeah.
So it's really interesting to see how this can work. You know?
Yeah, and then you get to you understand that, subculture is its own bubble,
Hmm.
you know, and so you kind of want to be in that bubble um, until that bubble is burst by, you know, many. I mean, there could be all kinds of
Hmm.
factors that can bring that, and that can be really exciting. It can shake things up a bit. I mean, I've met a guy in Berlin who was very transgressive with his outfit, and he was wearing kind of like suit pants, okay, and a button-down shirt, and like little loafers, and these kind of like 1970s kind of thick framed kind of glasses. I mean, he definitely still looked like he knew what time it was, in terms
Hmm.
of a kind of look. But that's not what was going on around,
Right, 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 right.
kind of really, really amazing, very singular, and he was really confident. It's like,
Yeah,
this is what I want to say.
yeah. This is and it's really interesting how this can happen. Hollis, stop saying interesting. Um, when even I grew up in hip hop, and it used to be such a powerful um cultural and fashion thing. I don't know what the right word is, but and then it got to a point where it just became, if you're hip hop, this is what you wear. You know what I mean? And it's almost like then, because at the time, like hip hop was almost like influencing other fashion, outside of this. And then it seems like this all went away. Like I want to say maybe like in the 90s, like especially, even though I remember we used to wear tight jeans or skinny jeans, or some form of this in the 80s. Then the 90s became about this really baggy look. And then when skinny jeans started to come back, there was like such a huge resistance to this. It was really, really strange. It was almost like, no, we made it to this in the 90s, and this is where we got to stay. You know what I mean? And it took a really, really long time to let go of this like oversized, like,
Yeah,
you know and
yeah.
but it was like for a culture that was so fashion forward at the time, to see it get to this, like a very forced conforming, yeah, so.
That's interesting because when what I'm digging into, what you're saying that I'm finding very interesting is how in within subcultures, subcultures are demarcated by certain things, which are definitely music and fashion. And when that set of markers for the outside society, the society outside of the subculture becomes dogma
Mm,
within the subculture,
mm,
that's when, that's usually the beginning of the end,
Mm, mm,
there's a big transition coming. The 90s were for me like the golden age of hip hop. That was like, it was so much about this desire for, real freedom, like there was really exciting, beautiful music that came out in the hip hop form.
mhm,
And so I can see it getting tied up with holding on to these, you know, ideas about what, getting really purist, about, okay, well, if it's hip hop, it's big clothes, it's big
mhm,
pants, it's not,
mhm,
not skinny pants. That's never what it ever was. And that could be that resistance to change,
mhm.
to evolution,
You just
possibly.
yes, yes, and you just actually reminded me of something because when I used to work at this music store and I used to see people coming in, and it was in a mall, and I would see people coming in and out of all ages and everything, and I remember talking to one of my coworkers about it's almost like you can see when someone considers the best time of their life, and whatever that is, this is where their fashion stops. You know what I mean? Like, so if it was, if if they were in high school in the 80s or whatever, and this is the best of times that they remember, they dress just like they did. They still have the big hair or whatever, and the acid wash. You know what I mean? You can see, so I can see if you could, if you consider, because as most people do consider the 90s the golden era, you know even, but although I think for me, I'm actually rediscovering 90s hip hop because I wasn't listening to hip hop so much in the 90s, because I was all into it in the late 70s and the 80s and the early 90s, but then I started getting into techno, and I was going to raves and stuff like this. So I was, but the funny thing about it is, even though I was fully immersed in rave culture, I was more dressing like grunge culture. So I was like, I was going to raves, and we always wore Doc Martin. My whole little crew, we were always in there with like Doc Martens and like lumberjack shirts, and and like either tights or long johns underneath, and all of it, like that full on grunge look, but totally going in a rave setting, So, um, and so I wasn't even wearing like 90s hip hop. I never actually wore 90s hip hop clothes. So, yeah.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
I like that a lot. Fran, I think it was Fran Lebowitz. She's a writer, probably in her 70s now, and she says that a person's style, when it becomes their style that's sort of frozen in time, it's usually a reflection of the best time of their lives.
Mm-hmm.
It just gets frozen there. But I mean, what you are describing sounds to me like how there was a desire to break down silos, between subcultures. And so, it was possible for you to kind of wear the markers of grunge style, in a different musical setting, where so we don't care anymore. And that's also a political act, to say like we don't care.